Today I'll be showing you how to have different GUIs on screen depending on a player's team. Resources from this video can be found in the important links section of the description if it's easier for you. First, make sure you have the Explorer and Properties enabled from the View tab at the top left of the screen. Afterward, make sure you have a few teams in your game already. If you don't have the Teams service, you can go over to the Model tab, select the Service button, and click on it and select Insert to add it into your game. You can then click the plus button next to the Team service, add in a team, and then you can select that team and adjust its team color property to whatever you'd like. For this tutorial, I've created 3 different teams, and there are 3 separate spawn points for those teams. If you'd like to set up spawn points as well, you can add them in through the Model tab by clicking on the Spawn button. Afterward, make sure you've scrolled down in its properties and adjusted its team color value to the exact same team color that the team has in its properties as well. In addition to this, I am also going to be disabling the neutral property and enabling the allow team change on touch property so we can walk over these spawn points to swap between the teams. And from this point, we can now get started with setting this up. Now that we have teams in our game, we need to create the GUIs. I'll just be showing a very basic example with mostly empty screen GUIs. In order to add a GUI into your game, click the plus button next to the Starter GUI and select Screen GUI. From here, you can click the plus button next to this and add a GUI object inside. In this case, I'm going to add in a frame, and inside of this frame, I'm going to add a text button. And then from here, we can go over and move this on the screen and adjust it as needed. I would suggest changing most of the properties via the Properties tab because it allows you to be much more accurate with what your GUI looks like. And now that we have these screen GUIs, we can move on to the next step. Before we write the script, we need to do something very important for each one of these screen GUIs. And this is to make sure that each of them are linked up with the correct team. In order to do this, select one of the screen GUIs and scroll down in its properties until you see the Attributes section. From here, we can click on the Add Attribute button, we can keep its type as string, and we're going to name this one Team, and then click Save. This will allow us to create a custom property, which we can use to let the game know which GUI is for which team. So once you've added that attribute, go back over to the properties, click on the box on the right side, and then type in the name of the team it'll be for. So in this case, because the team inside of the team service is called Orange Team, I'm going to make sure I spell and capitalize it in the exact same way. To make it easier, you can also right-click on one of the teams, click on Rename, right-click it, and click on Copy so that you can get the exact same spelling and capitalization. I'm going to do the same thing for the 2 other teams, so I can go over here, I'll copy the name of the Cyan team, I'll select the new GUI, and scroll down into its properties. I'll click on Add Attribute, the name of this attribute will be Team with a capital T, then I'll click on Save, and then I'll paste the name of this team as the value of this attribute. And then I'll do the same thing with the final screen GUI. So Team, and then we'll name this to Yellow Team. And keep in mind that the attribute is the only identifier for this, so it doesn't matter what the name of the actual screen GUI is. Before we continue, we're going to now move all of these screen GUIs directly into the server storage. Once these GUIs are in the server storage, we're going to create a folder for each team that will have their own GUIs. So I'll click the plus button next to the server storage, I'll add a folder inside, and I'm going to rename this to the exact same name as a team. So here I can rename this one to Cyan Team, and then I'll create 2 more folders which will be for the Orange and Yellow Team. And then from here, we can move it into its respective folder. So the Cyan Team GUI will go into the Cyan Team folder, Orange Team into the Orange Team folder, and then Yellow Team into the Yellow Team folder. And once you've done that, we can continue. We can go ahead and click the plus button next to the server script service and add a script inside. If needed, you can change the size of the text in the script editor by holding Control if you're on Windows or Command if you're on Mac and scrolling up or down. We can then get rid of the text inside and get started. We're going to start by creating variables for different things in the game. And the first one is going to be the player service. And this is going to allow us to detect whenever someone joins the game, and this will be useful for making sure we know when they respawn and change teams so that they can be given the correct screen GUI. In addition to this, we're also going to reference the server storage, and this is where all of the screen GUIs that we've created are going to be stored. So I'm going to make this variable equal to game:getService, and then server storage. By storing these references inside of a variable, it makes it much easier to reference these later on, since all we have to do is type the word on the left side when we want to talk about it, instead of typing game:getService and the name of the service every single time. Afterward, we're going to reference a third service, which is going to be the team service. And this is going to allow us to know how many teams are in the game, and also to detect whenever someone changes teams. So from here we can go down a few lines and start creating different functions. And the main function is going to be called update GUIs. And this is going to be responsible for updating the GUIs that the player has whenever they respawn or change teams. However, we first need to activate this function whenever someone joins, so the game knows which player needs their screen GUIs to be updated. So right down below this, I'm going to reference the players service and utilize the player added event and connect it to the function that is called update GUIs. So the script is going to be listening for whenever a player is added into the players service or whenever someone joins. And once that happens, it's going to let the script know, hey, you need to activate this function. And because this is being activated from someone joining the game, we're able to reference inside of the new function the player that joined. So inside of the parentheses here, I can add a parameter, which will be used to reference that player. And just in case the player added event doesn't work sometimes while playtesting in Studio, we can add a few lines of code right here, which will automatically loop through each player that is currently in the game and activate the function accordingly. I won't go in depth into how this works right now because we'll be utilizing loops during this function up here. And just keep in mind that this is completely optional. Actually, to make sure that this script isn't too cluttered, we're going to separate the update GUIs function from the one that's activated from the player joining the game. So I'm just going to copy paste these lines of code up here, and then I'm going to rename the second function to player join. And now we're going to replace wherever we had update GUIs earlier to player join. So this function is the one that's activated when someone joins the game instead. And from this point, inside of the player join function is where we're going to activate the update GUIs function. Because we'll need to update the player's GUIs when multiple different things happen, we're going to create a function inside of the player join function, which will handle activating it and sending the player through. So I'm going to call this activate GUI check, and inside of here we're going to call the update GUIs function by writing down the name of the function and adding these parentheses afterward. Inside of these parentheses, we're going to send through an argument, or whatever data we want to be sent through to the other function. In this case, it's going to be the player that joined the game, and this will make sure that the correct player has their GUIs updated at the right time. And down below this, we're going to be activating this function in several different ways. And the first of which is just going to be activating it straight away, so that once the player joins the game, they receive the correct GUIs. But from that point onward, we'll need to make sure that their GUIs are updated whenever the player's character respawns or whenever their character is added into the game. And in addition to this, we'll need to listen for whenever the player's team color changes, because that's one of the properties that is responsible for determining what team a player is on. So right below this, I'm going to reference the player, and we're going to listen for whenever that property is changed. So we're going to use the getPropertyChangeSignal method, and inside of the parentheses and quotation marks here, we're going to type in team color, and then do the same thing, connect it to the activate GUI check function. So now whenever the player joins the game, whenever their character respawns, and whenever their team color property changes, it'll activate this function, which is going to run the update GUIs function and send that player through. And now we can start working on this function over here. Before we're able to grant new GUIs to the player and remove any GUIs that are from other teams, we first need to reference where these are stored. And in this case, since we have access to the player, we can do that relatively easily. So I'm going to create a variable called player GUI, and I'm going to make it equal to referencing the player and waiting for something inside of the player instance that is called player GUI. And this is the folder where any of their screen GUIs are stored. Afterward, we're going to create the function that's going to handle most of the work. And this one is going to be called GUI check. And this is what is going to look through the player's player GUI folder and determine if they have any screen GUIs that they shouldn't have based on their current team. And we'll be activating this in two different ways, sending through a different value depending on if a player has a team or not. So right below this, we're going to create a conditional statement, which will check if something is true or not, so we can do something different for each of those cases. And in the first condition, we are going to check if not player.team, so if the player does not have a team, or if the player is neutral, which is another way of determining if the player does not have a team, then we're going to activate the GUI check function and send through a value of false. And this will indicate that the player is not on a team, so if it finds any screen GUIs inside of their player GUI folder, which have the team attribute that we created, then it can delete that screen GUI without needing to check the player's team. However, if this wasn't the case, we can say else if, so this is going to be an alternative condition. So, however, if the player has a team, and that player is not neutral, so player.neutral is equal to false, then we're going to activate the same function, except we're going to send through a value of true this time. And this will let the function know that it will need to check the player's team before deleting a screen GUI. So now inside of the parentheses over here, we're going to create a parameter that is called onTeam. And this is either going to equate to true or false, depending on which one of these conditions was met. So now we'll work on this function, and then after that we'll add on to this second condition, which will then give the player any new screen GUIs that might have been added into the server storage. So inside of this function here, we are first going to check what GUIs the player currently has. So we're going to create a loop, so we'll say for underscore, comma, item in I pairs, and then we'll say player GUI, get children with the parentheses at the end, and then we'll type do afterward and hit enter. And this is essentially creating a list of everything on the first layer of the player GUI folder. Whatever is to the left of the comma is going to reference the position in the loop that we're currently in, and we won't be needing it in this case, so I've made that an underscore. And on the right side, we're referencing the item or the value that was found at the current position of the loop. So for example, if we were to loop through the team service, this might be position 1, and the item that we'd find there is cyan team. And then afterward, this would be position 2, and the item that was found during that part of the loop is orange team, and then so on and so forth. So for each of these items, what we're going to do is check if they have the team attribute. So here, we're going to create a variable called attribute check, and we're going to make this equal to referencing the item and seeing if we can get an attribute or obtain a value from this attribute with the name of team. And if a value was returned from this, so if attribute check, then we can continue and then check what value was stored inside of that attribute, which is going to be the name of a team. So here we are now going to loop through the team service and check if any of the team names match up with the value of this attribute. So here we're going to say for underscore, comma, team in I pairs, teams, get teams, and this will return a list or a table of every single team that is currently in the game. And for each of those teams, what we are going to do is check if the value of attribute check is equal to one of the team's names, and if that happens to be the case, we're then going to check if the player is on a team or not. So now we're going to check if the value that was sent into the function is equal to true, and if that's the case, if the player's current team name is not equal to the value of the attribute, then we know we can destroy the screen GUI, which in this case we refer to as item inside of the loop. And this is because if the player is on a team and they have a screen GUI with an attribute for a different team, we know that they're not supposed to have it. On the other hand, if the value that was sent into the function was false, so if onTeam is equal to false, we know they're not on any team. So in this case, we're going to destroy any of the items that it finds with that attribute, because we've only added that to any screen GUIs which are meant for players of a specific team. And now that we've done this, we can go ahead and scroll back down to the conditional statement at the very bottom, because we need to make sure that the player receives the new screen GUIs if they need any for their current team. So the first thing we're going to do is look through the server storage and reference the folder for that player's team. So what we're going to do is create a variable that is called GUI folder, and we're going to make it equal to looking through the server storage for the first item that has the name of the player's team. And what this will allow us to do, once we've made sure that it exists, so if GUI folder, and if that item that was found happens to be a folder, so let's say GUI folder is a folder, then what we could do is loop through that folder, and for each of the screen GUIs inside, we're going to place it into the player GUI folder. So now we can go ahead and create a loop. So for underscore, comma, GUI in I pairs, GUI folder, colon, get children. So for each of those items. So we'll say, if not player GUI, find first child with the name of that GUI. Then we can continue because we know that the player does not already have this screen GUI. And we're making sure that we check for this to ensure that we don't give the player the same GUI 2, 3, or however many times, just in case they already have it. So the first thing we could do from here is create a new variable called clone GUI. And we'll make this equal to referencing the current GUI inside of the folder in the server storage and creating a clone of it. And the reason we're doing this is to make sure that once the player is given the screen GUI, that there is still going to be a version of it in the server storage. Because otherwise, if we were to just give them the GUI directly from the folder, that means it's going to move out of the folder into the player's player GUI, and then there isn't going to be anything left for other players who join that team, or if this player needs to receive that GUI again after respawning or changing back to that team. So once we've created a clone of this GUI, we can then parent it to the player's player GUI folder. And now that we've completed this, we can go over to the Home tab and click on the Playtest button to make sure that it works. As you can see, I've spawned on the Cyan team, and I have the Cyan team screen GUI. If I go over to another team, I'll be given their screen GUI, and I can always swap back to the other team. And this works for each one of these, and let's say I wanted to go to a team that did not have their own screen GUI, it's going to work completely fine. And at the top left of the screen, this is a screen GUI that was placed into the starter GUI service. So this is something that remains on the screen no matter what team I change to, because this was given to everyone upon joining the game. So if there's anything that you want every team to have, you don't have to worry about it being removed if you've changed teams. If this helped you out, make sure to leave a like on the video. If you're interested in more, check out the playlist and video at the left side of the screen. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, make sure to leave a comment down below. Anyway, hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, night, or whatever time it is there, and I hope to see you next time, so bye-bye!